Welcome to the No Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
And my name is Joe Augustin, and welcome to a program that tries its best to, first of all, get it done within 2 hours. Actually, we started off by trying to get it done in 1 hour. But we try to get across all the kind of stuff that you may not have seen in the news, or at least the nuances that go along with that. The idea is perhaps it'll help you make sense of the world a bit better in terms of having a more balanced view. Perhaps it makes you more interesting at the weekend as well when you have a conversation with somebody else. What we also try to do is have diverse views on the program. And just before we introduce our guest today, we have two guests on the show today. I'm just going to invite you, first of all, to go and click on subscribe, like, whatever it is on the various media that you're watching this on right now. If you're seeing this on Facebook or YouTube, give us a like, give us a subscribe, and you can always take it back because we might offend. In the meantime, let's please welcome our guest today. Before we do that, yeah.
So, but we also want to take the fear out as much as we can because we know it's a scary time. So that's another thing that we're trying to do. And the other thing is, Joe and I wanted to wish everyone in Australia success at the Australian Brass Banding Championships because his sister and my sister, in fact, most of my family are involved in that this Easter weekend. It used to be a huge part of my life. Easter is very different in Asia compared to what I grew up with, and you as well in your time in Australia, right, Joe?
Yeah.
Wishing them success.
Well, we have to explain now. So it's a military brass band it's a non-military brass band. It's a band. No. It's a band brass contest. Band. Yeah. Huge bands. You've never seen that many trombones in one place.
Or euphoniums.
And all other instruments. All right, so time to get our guests on who are going to help us have a diverse conversation today. We're going to have Cohen Tan, CSP. His goal is to help the silenced reclaim their true voice, one story at a time. Cohen coaches business leaders to inspire and lead through magnetic stories, and he's the host of the Wholehearted podcast. Welcome, Cohen. And our second guest for today, Philip F. Sin, is a speaker, author, strategic parenting advisor, investment management advisor, as well as an edutech and nonprofit community advisor. And of course, your book recently out. It's just how's it like having a new child?
Oh, it's my third one, I guess. Well, no, actually my fourth, counting my dog. So it's been nice.
Yeah, so welcome to the show. And today is actually quite an interesting one because I think this is the very first one that we've done on a public holiday.
Oh, is it? Yeah. So we'll see how many people tune in. But yeah,
we'll see.
We've got time.
Yeah. So before we head down the usual path, talk about the show itself. First of all, Cohen, you want to spend a moment just to we'll give you the 30-second pitch on what you do. Let people know who you are a bit more that I didn't say perhaps just now.
Thank you first of all for having me on this show. Thank you very much, Joe and Andrea Edwards. I just want to say that I coach leaders who are often misunderstood to express their voice so that they can be understood and respected and appreciated. So a lot of the leaders I coach are leaders who lead with a whole heart. They are sensitive souls, but at the same time, they have to show up briefly in a world that's very uncertain. And great time to be on the show.
Yeah, it's good to have you here, buddy. And I know that this time is quite challenging for you because you are very much a publicly stated empath.
Yes.
And I know that you struggle a little with what's going on in the world. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Okay, sure. Yeah. Thanks very much again for having me on the show because it's just a chance for me to really, rant. Okay, maybe not rant, but just kind of express what's in my heart. I'm an empath. I'm a very sensitive person. I'm a world traveler, a lover of life. And I think what we have seen over the past couple of weeks have really just, been thrown in the face of everything that I hold dear to my life. And that's the reason why I'm having such, strong emotional as well as visceral reaction to what's happening. Not wanting to be melodramatic, but the reason why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling is because it really just flies in the face of everything that I hold to be true and to be important to me in my life.
Yeah. So Phil, what's on the top of your mind right now? What's getting you?
Well, I think, as a parent, I think a lot about the future, mostly for my kids, and hopefully one day they'll have their own kids. So these kind of trends, I think I take a little bit of a step back and kind of look at it over a longer term and trying to see, what I can do to help position my kid's situation so that they can deal better with these kind of uncertainties, right? And I think this is just the beginning. I mean, Trump's first term was quite unpredictable. So I don't know if we can actually expect his second term to be any less predictable.
Oh yeah, there's no guardrails this time around. Tell us about your latest books, because you said you've
Sure.
written 4. Yeah.
Oh no, it's my fourth kid. Just joking around with
Oh
Joe there.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's my first book actually. It's actually an accidental project. It was during COVID. I was in the investment management industry for about 30 some odd years. First time I was actually at home for an extended period of time, not traveling, and got inspired by a couple of books I read and decided to write this book for my kids. And people ask me, what is it about? I kind of tell them that the best way to think about it is to think about it as strategic parenting. And what that really means to me is just looking at things from raising kids from a long-term perspective. And I cover philosophy, psychology, and also finance or prosperity. And I try to do it through the lens of pragmatism, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. We've got Ram Prasad here. Welcome. All right, I'm going to take these banners off and give us a little bit more space. All right, you guys ready to get stuck in?
Absolutely.
All right, so this year, because we are living in a very different world to the one we even lived in the year before, even though lots of things are crazy, I've been studying the show a bit differently, and we're going to talk about the theme, is the US underestimating China? And obviously everyone here is based in Asia, so we look at this from a very different lens to a lot of what people in the US may be looking at it. My husband recently came back from the US and he had some fascinating conversations, and it's so out of alignment with what we see. So I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation to dig into. But first, any big news moments, big news shocks, anything that's really just caught your attention that you just wanted to start off with? It could be anything. I've got a couple if you're not ready to start.
Well, I just like to share that I come from a place of, I work a lot in China. I do a lot of speeches and workshops in China. And every time I go to China, I've always been astounded by the level of development in China. And one of the things that that's very interesting for myself as a Singaporean Chinese is that whenever I return, or maybe not return, but whenever I go to China, I almost feel like an outsider, because although I speak the same language and I have the same color skin and I have same ancestry, the way we think, the way we approach matters are very, very different. And my stints in China have really given me a broader appreciation of emotional intelligence, the idea of saving face, the idea of being diplomatic in our communications. And also, I personally think that from what I've seen in China, the people there really know what they're doing. There's a strategy around it. There is an intention around everything that they do. I don't want to share too much, but I'll just share that I personally think that what I've seen in China is very much in direct contrast with what we're seeing right now, the rhetoric coming out of the US.
Yeah.
Hey,
All right.
sorry, Tech, Colin, I'm just going to do a very quick tech pop in there. I know we were trying to get you to get closer to the mic before at the beginning, right? But now you're getting passionate, so we're going to get you to push back just a little bit from the microphone. Phil, what's been surprising you? What's been catching your breath?
Well, I think, this news certainly was a bit of a surprise, but I think what surprised me more behind the news is the lack of detail. Just kind of came out, and then I think a lot of us expected the changes that just kept popping out. And it was interesting that everything was done through an executive order, right? Or through executive orders. And that kind of led me to the second surprise, which is that, no one from the judicial or the legislative branches pushed back, which is quite interesting. So, we're kind of letting, I guess the US is just kind of letting this go and see where it goes.
Yeah,
All
well,
right.
there's been some pushback. The thing is now the question is whether or not the test of the pushback is gonna happen, right? I mean, I think the judge has held them in contempt, and we'll see what happens if anything happens from that. That's going to be, it seems far fetched in the light of things right now. Andrea, for you, what was your shock? What was the thing that
Well,
got you?
shock, surprise, or other, right? So one of the things that happened, obviously, in the last week was Katy Perry and a few other ladies were flown into space with Bezos, and it really created a very interesting conversation, and a lot of it was that they were basically out of sync with the realities of people on the ground. True, that the message of it being great for women was challenged because, of course, there's a lot of great women in science, especially in the aerospace industry, who don't get any credit, or their names and photos being taken off websites. What concerned me about this is that this was the flight that people attacked as a group of ladies, but there's been other flights before that didn't get as brutally attacked. Now, it could be just the moment it happened in, or it could be more about women being more attacked in public, and a lot of women were doing the attacking too. So I was kind of like, I don't know if people were really sort of tuned into what was going on there, but I was a bit concerned about it. The other thing that I'm paying attention to is the Canadian election and the Australian election. I know Singapore's got its election coming up too, but Albanese, who's Labor, so that would be Democrat if you're in the US, didn't look like he was going to do too well. But Dutton, the Liberal, which is the equivalent of the Republicans, sounds like he keeps putting his foot in his mouth, and I'm very happy about that. But also in Canada, so Mark Carney's obviously sort of really standing out as a potential to win the election, which he wasn't. And there's some commentary around Trump's not attacking Canada as much and saying what he was saying as much because he wants the right, which is Polivier, or is that how you say his name, to win. So I'm watching both of those elections with interest. I think that's going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think maybe Andrea. Sorry, I'm going to jump in here on the Blue Horizon thing. It's quite an interesting thing, right? Because I was just reading in passing as well, and my understanding, I think, from the criticisms that I kept reading about was the fact that, a lot of people are concerned about their livelihoods, jobs, inflation, and they just sort of seen this as a PR event for a bunch of wealthy people, right, who can afford to fly out into space. So I don't know if that's how you see it as well.
Yeah, it just felt tone deaf, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But they've all felt tone deaf to me for different reasons, just from a climate impact perspective, right? So
well, that too.
Yeah.
I was actually on the topic of this particular flight or mission, as they called it, was the contrast between what you see in terms of PR, photographs, videos, interviews, and the actual live feed as they were falling down to earth. I found that just to be fantastic. It was when I have you heard the video? Heard the audio of the when they're coming in for a landing?
No.
It is absolute terror. Do not put civilians who don't know what free fall feels like in a capsule live on the air. They sound like they're gonna die. And they were convinced of that. And if you saw the video as well, once Gail comes off, she passionately goes and kisses the ground. You think that's weird and sort of staged until you hear that audio and you go like, she really thought she wasn't coming back.
Right.
But anyway, the thing that surprised me the most actually was the wonderful effort that America has put together. Actually, specifically the executive, the vice president, and the president to unite China. JD Vance's comments about the peasants. I mean that it's the equivalent of saying something about your mother, right? I mean that's what they basically did with that. And China, who normally wouldn't put that out on their social media because of all the censorship and all that, just let it fly, and it set the internet in China on fire. And if you think Chinese people are not sarcastic, you haven't been on the internet recently.
I got to tell you that's a side. Every country has a sense of humor, right? And like one of the funniest countries I've ever visited is Turkey. They are the funniest bastards I've ever come across, just in day-to-day life, right? Australia has a sense of humor. The Brits have like there's senses of humors, right? I have been really, really wonderfully surprised by the sense of humor that's coming out of China right now. You know, Carolyn Levitt, the spokesperson for the White House, her clothes, right? Have you seen that? They keep taking a picture of what she's wearing and then an image of it in China and what it's worth, you know, and it's been more than once. So yeah, I'm very impressed with the humor.
Yeah, there's also, of course, the concern. I mean, we've had the rise of one Trump, but have you seen the rise of China Trump?
Yeah, I saw that. That was
yeah,
hilarious.
He's great.
He's awesome.
Yeah. So he's inspiring me to work on my Trump impersonation.
Oh, come on. Oh, God, no.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, you come up with the Singapore version.
Talking about flying all the way to the space, right? It's like I was on a different vessel, not a spacecraft, but I was on a cruise ship for the last 3 weeks, about 1 month ago, and I was giving lectures, a guest lecturer on the different places we were visiting, and before we got to Penang, Malaysia, I was presenting something about the MM2H, the Malaysia My Second Home scheme, and I was shocked, okay, because there were about like 70 to 80 audience members, and they were mostly Americans, and they were on their smartphones and they were taking photos of my slides, and I think they were really thinking about migrating to Malaysia, and it was very fascinating for me because it really triggered a conversation around where should they escape to. So I mean, some places like Portugal, Spain are obviously one of the more common places, but Malaysia suddenly became also a very popular choice for them right now, and I think the sentiments are true that on the ground many people are sort of plotting their escape.
Yeah, good if you can afford it, right?
That's a great point.
I mean, Malaysia's got a lot of empty buildings that the Chinese built, right? So they've got the space, but but the mass movement, the mass movement out of the US, as well as the lack of tourists coming into the US, and the impact that's going to have on the travel and tourism industries, big. But Portugal's closed its doors, right? Because the problem with these golden visa initiatives, where they open up the doors and try and bring everybody in, is they increase housing prices. I think Portugal's housing's gone up by like 250% or something, right? So that impacts the locals. Locals get unhappy, and we know in Spain they're not happy about the number of tourists as well. So so let's get on to the topic, the first one, which is the tariffs, right? And it's been very, very interesting watching lots and lots and lots of different perspectives on this. Of course, there's people, like if you watch any of the Fox News stuff, they talk about it positively, but then you go to any other channel, but you go outside. And one of the things that I feel very, very strongly is the arrogance of the US when it comes to the rest of the world. So they're talking about some agreements that, they tried to put in place for countries in the global south to rise 20, 30 years ago, and they didn't succeed. And so it's almost like that's kind of where their thinking still is. There was, what's his name? I listened to a podcast. I recommended it to you guys to listen to. Ezra Klein. He was talking to someone. And he was saying for 6 years, Americans haven't been in China. And 6 years in China is a really, 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 really long time. And there's a lot that's happened there. And America has no sort of view of what's going on. And we see it, whether it's the robots planting forests, the size of Germany to stop deforestation. But yeah, tariffs. What do you guys think?
I'll let the guests go first before I download everything else that's left to be said.
Sure. I thought about this, and I kind of said to myself, is this another distraction? And if it is a distraction, what are they distracting from? And when I was just doing some research in anticipation of this talk, I was looking up sort of the contribution of manufacturing to the U.S. economy. And I believe the number is somewhere around 10%, right? And so I'm thinking to myself, it's 10%. The service industry is something not a lot of people are talking about. namely tourism. I think you referenced that earlier, Andrea. There's also the whole educational thing, the number of students studying there. I mean, that certainly helps. So, they're not talking about that. But then I'm thinking to myself, what is the real threat, right? And maybe you're right. Maybe it's because, they haven't been to China for a long time. But if you take the DeepSeek example specifically, maybe the fear is on the technology side. Maybe there's a fear that, the Chinese are going a lot quicker than anybody anticipated. And maybe the technology sector in the US is now starting to feel a bit threatened. And perhaps, instead of going directly for it, they're just using this as a way to slow down the economy or sort of hurt the economy of China as a way to get around to doing that. So that's, again, there's no justification behind that thought. It's just something that just came to mind.
Yeah.
Thanks, Philip, for sharing
What about
that.
you?
No, I think I just second, Philip,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right, and
Yeah.
there is information coming out that backs up exactly what you're saying. One of the interesting pieces that I shared only today or yesterday was in the Irish Times, and the message is to the EU: you unite with us, and reject China, which I find because to me that's the underlying. Of course, they've got to try that, but they're not doing it in a way that endears anyone to them, right? The whole kissing our ass, sucking up to us, that message, which doesn't go down with anyone. Did you see the Japanese Prime Minister?
Yes, I saw that.
Yeah.
That was hilarious,
right.
man.
Right. Basically saying, we're dealing with like a mafia bully.
Yeah.
And if you extortion,
I was
was
gonna-
the word.
I
Yes,
was going to say,
extortion.
right, I think the whole thing about American foreign policy in the past few months is it all makes sense when you have a strong Italian accent on it. I mean, that's so Cohen. Yeah, sorry, we were going to your thoughts.
Oh, okay. First of all, right, something that I just want to share is that I think the rest of the world is trying to use the intellectual facility to try to make sense. I think what the world needs is now sense making. We're trying to make sense of, is he a distracting policy? Is he trying to bully people? Is he trying to extort certain things? Actually, sometimes we try to use our intellectual facility to try to make sense of things. But to me, and I risk sounding extremely brusque and simplistic, I think it is just the act of a bully who doesn't have a plan, who has a lot of bravado, So the person I reference is Jeffrey Sachs. And Jeffrey Sachs is an economic professor, and I listen to his words, and it makes a lot of sense. Right? Over the last 20 to 30 years, what happens after the end of the Cold War with Russia is that the Americans stop getting curious about the world. Before the Cold War, because there's a strong power, the American diplomats are going around, talking, whining and dining and using charisma on different countries to build allyship. But over the last 30 years, what Americans have done is that they have become rather inward focused. And at the same time, they haven't really taken care of the people in the American heartlands. They were talking about Idaho, Wyoming, we're talking about Minnesota, Wisconsin, the Midwest, maybe the northern Midwest. And these places are typically white Americans. And these are places that used to have, like Detroit, Model Town, right? They have their manufacturing, their car manufacturing and everything. So two things happened. Number one, automation happened. So a lot of these Americans were displaced from the jobs. Number two, cheaper manufacturing happens, right? So obviously with all these multinational corporations, even Boeing, right, manufactures a lot of the planes or assembles a lot of their planes offshore, right? So they've moved a lot of this manufacturing offshore. And so these Americans have lost their job. So I think they're still kind of hankering for the good old days. But these are exactly the states. They are the swing states. These are the states that voted for Donald Trump. And so the rhetoric here is that Donald Trump has to appease this group of people. And unfortunately, I wished that Donald Trump has a little bit more about him, but his way of appeasing is just simply common enemy, blame China, blame China, blame China. Right? It's easy, right? Because it doesn't require a lot of mental facility. And the irony of it, and the reason why I'm so heartbroken about this is that One of my favorite subjects to study in school is economics. And I studied economics for A-levels. I studied economics in business school, where I went to university in Singapore. And if you think about it, most of our HR, marketing, economics textbooks, where were they written? United States. Where do we hold as the paragon of academic excellence, of great logical, analytical thinking? The United States. So that's the reason why a lot of us have dreams of sending our children or even going ourselves to these Ivy League colleges. But now what we are seeing is a whole country of people. A lot of these people are amazing scholars, wonderfully compassionate people, great, authentic, empathetic, wholehearted leaders. But they are under the rule of one bully. One man who knows no better, who's trying to bury the world with all his bravado. And he's just basically playing to these people. And he says we are bringing manufacturing back to the US. Our great American craft people. Did you hear Ludwig say that? Our great American craft people screwing iPhones. I'm like, excuse me? That ship has sailed for a long, long time, right? Tell an American Gen Z that they're going to be working in the factory screwing mobile phones. They all have dreams of becoming YouTubers. They have dreams of becoming, famous, startup founders. They don't want to be in the factory screwing iPhones. I'm like, so it's just befuddling for me, right? It's like sometimes we try to use logic or intellectual facility to try to justify what we see as just so incomprehensible. I think we need to call it what it is, just incomprehensible Trumponomics. And just the news, right? He's lobbying, or rather he's put on social media that the Fed chairman Powell, his firing cannot come sooner enough, and he should never be lobbying for the firing of the Fed chairman, because that person is independent of politics. So I'm sorry if I come across rather emotional, but I think sometimes it just doesn't make sense for us to use logic to try to understand morons.
It's true, but like talking about I mean, there's loads of stuff that I sent you, but talking about some of the things. So rare earth metals. So there's a great piece in, I think it's on the BBC, and it sort of talks through. Let me find it. Talks through the rare earth metals, and one of the waste from rare earths is nuclear. So basically, there's 17 chemical elements that sit in the rare earth metals space. If you don't know, that goes in your phone, it goes in washing machines, it goes in our cars, all the way through to weapons, right? So basically, China's cutting the US off at the knees and saying you can't have any of these rare earth metals. So they don't only just have the majority of them in the country, they also have built the processing over decades. So nobody else can come in and compete with China right now. So they extract them and they refine them for sale. So they've got 61% of the rare earth metals in the world in the country, and they're responsible for 92% of the processing. Nobody else even comes close, right? No one. So that's a big issue for the US, and a classic case of governments that have kept their eye off the ball. So the difference between China and Western democracies is long-term thinking, strategic thinking. We see it in Singapore too. They plan for the long term, and that's a big one. We've heard a lot about semiconductor chips, right? So that's a big one. That's why Taiwan's in the mix. iPhones, if they get made in the US, they'll be $3,500 for a handset, right? That's a lot. The next big fight that's coming up is obviously pharmaceuticals. So it was interesting. I was looking at this, and I presumed, based on what I've been hearing, because I'm not a pharmaceutical industry expert, that obviously the US is really suffering here. 44% of pharmaceuticals are manufactured in the US. That's the biggest manufacturing base in the world. So they've already got a huge chunk of it. But the thing about manufacturing pharmaceuticals, and why a lot of poorer countries do it, is because they release a lot of waste into the environment, and that's medication into the environment, which obviously goes into waterways, air, and earth where we grow our food. So people who live close to these factories are impacted by this. So America doesn't want these places being put in their backyards. Like, this will be a classic NIMBY example, right? So this fight around pharmaceuticals, and Ireland's obviously a big focus for that because they've obviously got a big industry there. But the US is significantly larger than the rest of the world for manufacturing pharmaceuticals. So I was kind of curious why that one's on the table as well. So, but like Cohen said, you can't look at any of this logically.
Yeah. Well, it's because what you're trying to do is when you look at what he's doing, you're trying to go like, okay, so what is the laser-like focus that is being applied here? What kind of precision tool are we looking at, right? And what it really is a sledgehammer to solve a screwdriver problem, right?
Yeah.
There is some idea behind that. In fact, I was listening to it and going like, okay, there's something in there. There's something about maybe a fine-tuned sort of thing where you could negotiate this and that, and you could make it happen. But what I suspect the most actually is this is actually adult conversation overheard by a young Donald Trump come back to haunt, as in he was a kid. His father, who had a very simplistic view about how to create business, perhaps had his own golden view about what the 30s were like as well, because that would be the bridge in terms of the times, and then talking about tariffs in a way that you get imprinted with these things from really young, and you think, you know what, that sounds like a really good idea. This is something I would do. I mean, the whole thing about like, if I were president, I would. I think you're seeing it with this. He really, really is into it because this is the thing that he wants to do. I mean, the other thing, of course, he wants to do is he wants to try out that nuclear button before he's done. We hope we don't get to that, but he's done it with tariffs because, he really thinks it's going to work. And it really is one of those situations where you go like, everybody else in the room has said out, and as much as they could have said as well, has kind of said this is not a great idea, except the people who have no, they don't see themselves as the expert in it, and they give away their authority on that to somebody who's supposed to know better. Everybody else who knows better has gone, nope, this is not a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. I want to recommend these will all be in the weekend reads. The global economy is in turmoil. Now is the time to build a new order. And so this is in Al Jazeera. And if you're not following Al Jazeera, I recommend doing it. It's one of those, it's a perspective that's, I think, is worth doing. But it really talks about one of the things I love the way it starts, right? In short, we live in a world imperialist economy that continually reproduces inequality, poverty, and war, and is driven by capitalist logic of ever-expanding accumulation that is pushing us towards planetary breakdown. We need an alternative vision, and fast. Anyways, that's a really great one. But then in the New York Times, the tsunami is coming. China's global exports are just getting started. And this is a really interesting piece that sort of talks about, the size of China's industry. So Volkswagen used to be the biggest complex in the world for car manufacturing. In China, BYD, 2 factories in China are both capable of producing twice as many cars as that factory, right? So the scale is massive. The investment from the Chinese central banks is massive, 1.9 trillion to industrial borrowers over the last 4 years. Academic and research, that investment. Huawei, that most people will remember Huawei because they nearly got killed, basically. But they've just opened in Shanghai a research center for 35,000 engineers that have 10 times as much space for offices and labs as Google's headquarters in Mountain View, California. And the priority on education and intelligence in China and how competitive it is, we know that that's going to be filled up pretty quickly. And then you think about what they're able to achieve. But the article, I can't find the word. There's a Chinese term for resilience, and I think that's the thing that people in
I think it's called being
West,
Chinese.
No, it's a cultural term, but it's here somewhere, but I just can't find it. But it's a really interesting term. But it basically, I talk about it with people who don't really know the region that well, but during the pandemic in Phuket, I saw people going back into the ocean to fish. I saw them growing herbs and vegetables at home. They went back to the earth around them and the water around them to sustain them while they didn't have financial sort of stability during the pandemic, right? And that's because the memory is still there. Even in Singapore, one of the person who owns our house, their father, who's an elderly man, mate, we've got bananas. You wouldn't believe what we've got growing. We've got a jackfruit tree that's so full of jackfruits right now they're going to fall off. Right, there's too many to eat. Papayas, it's all growing, right? Because there's a generation here that still remembers relying on the land to feed themselves, and that gives you a resilience that my grandmother used to grow a garden. She died when she was 104, right? So, but we don't. People who come from places like Australia, we're too disconnected from sustaining ourselves. So we rely on the system to sustain us, and we don't know what to do when these crises happen. And that's a difference, I think, between China and America. That disconnect between being able to feed yourself. If you can feed yourself, you can survive anything, right? And you can get through any bad time. But the resilience, I think, yeah.
I mean, back to Joe's point, right, about, you know, what the U.S. is trying to fix. I mean, what exactly is the U.S. trying to fix?
Yeah.
You know, some of the articles that you sent over, Andrea, you know, we talked about the deficit. You know, not just the trade imbalance, but just the deficit in general, right? And, you know, and I don't know whether I'm just reading the bad news out there, but, you know, you're hearing a lot about the average American just not being able to afford things. They're you know, defaulting on their school loans, their car loans, their credit card loans, their mortgages. You know, and you kind of ask yourself, you know, yeah, maybe the problem is something, like you said, a bit more systemic, right? Maybe it's about this whole capitalistic model that needs to be relooked. And one of the things I find interesting is that, you know, that people like to label things, right? It's like, you know, passion versus money, right? And it's like, you know, communist, capitalist, socialist. And at the end of the day, I kind of think of the world as sort of a spectrum, right? And you know, I think we're all convinced that capitalism works. It's a matter of what form of capitalism we should be looking at, right? And I always allude back to the 1970s and looking at you know, the Friedman doctrine, right? Milton Friedman with this write-up, I think it was published in the New York Times, talking about how the responsibility of every company is to return all of the profits back to the shareholders. Let them make the decision and vote their conscience. And for me, when I think back to that statement, then I think about, you know, the 1980s where I grew up in the US and Wall Street, Michael Douglas, and the whole greed is good. And you know, I'm just thinking to myself, is this what's kind of led us to where we are today? And we don't really look at and think hard about it and say, well, you know, we need to change that approach. And if we don't start there, then, you know, we're really just putting Band-Aids rather than trying to tackle the real problem. So let me stop there. But, you know, I'm a big advocate of thinking about this problem of just pure greed in the corporates.
Well, so much to unpack here.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead, go on.
Sorry, there's just so much to unpack here. I think the conversation has moved a lot. And I also want to give credit to Philip's questions around, like, what really are some of the systemic issues. Over the last year and a half, I've been to US 3 times. And every time I go there, I am just seeing things deteriorating before my very eyes. Like, I cannot even walk up to a cathedral and say, oh, what a beautiful cathedral, and I want to snap a photo. And there'll always be some homeless people coming up to me and asking for money. And I don't even want to get too close to the cathedral because it frankly stinks, right? And you kind of think of homeless people have set up store there. And the other interesting thing that I went into a typical Walmart, Walgreens, to buy a packet of potato chips. Okay, maybe a potato chip is not really an essential item, but just to consider this, right? A bag of Frito-Lays is $5.50 US, and it's 5.50 Singapore dollars. I can't imagine that particular packet of potato chip have been shipped all the way from the US to Singapore and past several middlemen and distributors, and it's 5.50 Singapore dollars and it's 5.50 US. I don't understand, right? I can only imagine that there must be some kind of like capitalist, you know, like really fattening their own wallets, right? It's like raising the prices, you know, using maybe, you know, I don't know, maybe it's a supply chain thing, but I just don't understand. It just beggars belief, right? That something in Singapore can be cheaper when it originates from the US. So I think the local people in the US are just not able to afford basic necessities. And I think that this is something that has been a systemic issue. I mean, here in Singapore, we take for granted because our government always have, all kinds of retraining, reskilling, upskilling. Sometimes, when our Institute of Adult Learning rolled out all these terms like upskilling, reskilling, we think of it as background noise, like the aircon, like, oh, is it one of those stuff again? But we are really seeing this happening at a very big scale in heartland America, right? It's like I mentioned, in those like Midwestern states, right? These are people that has been neglected for a long time. There hasn't been proper upskilling, retraining to give them new jobs, right? To help them to move up the value chain. We talk about globalization and trade. It's all about really moving up the value chain. So, for example, I mean, and I say this without wanting to sound cocky, right? I hire a domestic helper. I have a domestic helper. She helps me with, washing my clothing. She helps me with the housework and everything, so that I can do the economically more so-called valuable. I don't mean to put them down. The work of really sitting in front of my laptop, churning out proposals, training proposals, speech proposals, preparing my slides for my keynote speeches, because that's where I'm economically most valued, not to do the housework. So we outsource work like that. So it's the same thing too, right? The United States have become a high value in the economy, right? They are the people who comes out with AI. They are the people who comes out with SaaS, software as a service. They are the people who develop the latest technology. They are the people who are at the forefront of these things, right? So leaving manufacturing behind is only a natural way of being. To say that you want to bring manufacturing back at the expense of all your big tech, and you're kind of really killing off your competitive advantage so that you can bring big tech. I'm not an economist, but it doesn't take rocket science or economics Nobel Prize to know that that's just doesn't make sense at all. So I really think that we are really, really going back 50 to 60 years with what's happening with the tariffs recently. And the Americans have also become consumers, right? Because of the purchasing power that they have experienced or they have enjoyed over the last 40 to 50 years. Now there are people who buy Bordeaux wines. There are people who buy European holidays. There are people who buy, branded goods, flat screen television. So it's become a consumer market in the United States. And so maybe the younger generation of Americans don't have that same level of resilience, to use a word, Andrea Edwards, around how do we go back to the basics. So that's the reason why, I guess, things really need to change. But I think we are going the wrong direction with these tariffs and stopping global trade.
Joe,
Well,
do you want to wrap this one up?
Yeah, no, sorry. I was just going to say, right. So the big view is always about how you move up the value chain, you do a lot of stuff and all that. But the trouble is, there's also geographic advantages in the US, right? I mean, you talk about all this technology development, all that. It actually centers around California. It goes back to San Francisco. It goes to all these areas where that collection of people are. They're creating lots of value. And the thing is, on the other side of it is, if there are no jobs as well to support the society, that becomes the real challenge. And it's a blame game, right? Life is bad. Who do I blame? If you think about this, right, the US talks about this, or at least the rhetoric is all about the trade imbalance, right? Life should be terrible in Singapore because we have a trade imbalance with so many countries. It's horrible. We buy so many things from so many people. It's terrible. But it's about the narrative. It's about the story, right? Do you look at it as a thing where there's an imbalance, indicating that we are so well off we get to buy stuff, or do you make it a thing where you say, like, that's the reason why life is bad, right? So it's just really about the narrative, what the story is. When you talk about governments and they say a government is in surplus, or it's spending too much money, some people say that it's irresponsible. On the other hand, you go like, well, that's a really generous government. It's investing in what it has to invest in. So it's about the labels we accept. It's about the narrative that people drive. And it's about the emotions that you feel around that as well, because you can blame somebody for what's going wrong. And I was, I spent way too much time and ruined my YouTube algorithm because I was studying about fascism. And it's kind of funny when you go like, as a joke, a punchline, you go like, well, it's out of the fascism playbook, but it really literally is out of the fascism playbook. If you read what the fascists say you do, he's done it, and they've done it, and
that's our next
we should be
topic.
fair. Yeah. Okay. Well, that was my attempt to bring it on.
Yeah.
Can I just say
I think
something?
but before we
Can I
do, let
just-
Cohen finish.
Yeah, I just want to finish up with what Joe has said, right? I think we cannot compare China and US. It's a very different political system. But having said that, right, we're talking about moving these people from the heartlands of the United States into, we're talking about urbanization, right? This urban migration, right? We talk about upskilling and everything. There's a certain stickiness to it, right? People who stay, in the Midwest, they want to stay put where they are. But in China, right, it's like there's a move from people in the rural areas to the big cities of Shanghai, Hangzhou, and the good thing about China is that the government has actually designated really like developmental zones. Like most of you would probably never have heard of Anhui in Hefei province, or rather Hefei in Anhui province. Okay, Hefei is a city. Hefei city in Anhui province. Like this place is is designated as the chips super manufacturing corridor in China right now, and this is not widely known outside of China. But my friends in China tells me that. Right, so what happens is that they actually designated certain places as special economic zones, special developmental zones, special new developmental areas, and they actually cater to allow these people from rural China to migrate towards these bigger cities. If you think of Shanghai, it's a very interesting conundrum as well. The Shanghainese wants to work in a bank. They want to work in all the cushy white collar office jobs. But the typical person who is sweeping your streets, delivering your food, driving your Didi Chuxing, which is your Uber in China, these are people from the provinces of China. So there's this system of allowing people to kind of like level up, moving to bigger cities, earn a bigger wage, earn a better living for their family, to ship it back to their family. And I don't know whether that there is that movement in the United States, because what happens is that there hasn't been this retraining and this allowance for people to move up the value chain to complete my argument.
And I think that's the thing, Cohen, that people don't get about this region of the world in particular. Like in Thailand, the investment in education, the investment in the medical infrastructure, right down to the local level, right? It's that collective sort of societies, and the governments, if they're doing a good job, they're planning for the long term, because those people that move in and drive your Uber equivalent in China are going to have their children in that city who are going to be raised not poor but not wealthy, but they're the next generation that will be well educated, that could become the academics that have the next discovery, right? So it's that long-term thinking, always thinking, planning, and they don't get everything right. Like the whole housing crisis, that just really shocked me a few years ago in China. It was like, how could they get something so wrong, right? Because they're so planning. But I think that's a big point. But the next question is, give us a yes or a no. Is America now a fascist nation?
I don't believe it. I don't
No?
believe it is. I mean, I lived in America, grew up in America up until I was in my mid-20s. I think most Americans are, reasonable people. And I always say that, incentives drive behavior. We have to ask ourselves, why are all this administration, right? I mean, it's logical why they're supporting it. And I think Cohen, hit on a good point, right? You've lost jobs in the manufacturing sector. It hasn't come back. Now somebody's offering to bring them back. It makes sense, right? Incentives drives behavior. Now, my question is this, right? And I think the model we're used to in Asia is that, we expect the government to take the initiative to put out the strategy and say, hey, this is what we're doing, everybody, and this is done for a collective good. And so everybody toes the same line, and we try to make it work. Every so often, as you said, you stumble. But what I find interesting about America is that, we leave it up to the companies to decide what to do. right? So manufacturing jobs, did the US come out like maybe some of the Western European countries or maybe some of the Scandinavian countries say, hey, listen, guys, before you go and offshore every single job, maybe we should think about our people. Maybe we should think about, holding it back a bit. I'm not saying that we can't outsource, but let's manage it properly because people need jobs. And perhaps that's the big issue, right? We keep leaving it up to these companies. And being in the financial sector for 30 plus years, it's become so short term, right? Everything's about quarterly earnings now. And we can go and talk about things like, CEO pay as a number of times of the average worker pay and all that over the last 30 years. But the bottom line is, companies in the US are incentivized to maximize profits at the cost of everything else. So if there's no directive at the very top, I'm just asking myself, what company will go out there and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and have my stock prices tank because I just want to do the right thing. So that's just some thoughts I have about this.
Yeah. But it's also the reason why the world's in the state it's in as well, that freedom of corporations to make the decisions. And now we're moving into an extreme version of that, which we'll talk about in a bit. But Joe, what do you reckon? What are you saying after your delve into fascism?
You know what? I'm going to say it this way. If you ask the Germans if they were fascists, they would have said no while it was a fascist country. If you ask the Italians if they were fascists, they would have said the same thing as well. Look, I produce webinars, right? So we've been trying to put together a webinar for one of the people I serve. We have not been able to find someone to speak freely about America because of fear of retribution, right? Now, when have we been in a situation where we don't feel free to speak about America? That is one of the signs I think of a fascism, a fascist regime in place. The classic signs are there. The approach, first of all, to doing it. This thing about fake news and stuff and all that. It's literally in the playbook. It literally is the way it's been described. I'm amazed at how these old books are coming back. I mean, don't even if he hasn't read it, someone's helped him to understand the whole thing. So I'm going to say Steve Bannon, but it's understanding that principle. It's the whole play has been done. It has been done. They've taken all. Why it's so hard to speak about is it's so unfathomable, right? Because the rule of law is supposed to be the bottom line. And if you look at what's happened recently, the rule of law is being tested. The Supreme Court saying 9-0. That's not open to interpretation. This is what they say needs to be done, and they're not doing it. And they're saying they can't do anything about it. It's inaction, right? So now they're standing off basically against the Supreme Court. Basically, what you're saying now is executive versus the law, right? The law of the land, everything that's supposed to be the underlying process, which keeps a democracy, that's being tested. And currently the results are saying fascism.
Yeah. Because I think Philip was saying, the Americans he knows aren't fascists. Of course they're not. The Americans we all know, they're great. They're awesome. They're fantastic human beings. But we're not talking about the people. We're talking about, this whole El Salvador camp, right? So what's his name? Bukele. He went from being, so he was called the world's coolest what was it? Yeah, right. Now, no, I don't think anyone was against him until recently, apart from human rights groups keeping an eye on what's going on, because El Salvador has been in such a bad place for such a long time because it was run by gangs. He came up with solutions, and people are relatively happy about the solution, right? The people in the country, because they can walk down the street, the kids can go to school on a bicycle without, but by taking, so the Americans say, right, we're going to get rid of these terrorist gang members. Fine, okay. Just do it right. Like if they are terrorist gang members and they're not citizens, just do it right. You know, there's a gay hairdresser. There's one guy that everyone knows about, that everyone's talking about, and the minister from his state met with him today, but they're still not going to get him out of there, right? He's a dad, and apparently there's some domestic violence reports, you know. So this whole thing's become ugly. They didn't do it right. Just do it right. And if they had said that right at the beginning, said, right, we've messed up on a few of these, let's fix it, I think the American people would be generally behind them if the violent non-citizens in the country were being deported to a gulag in El Salvador. I think the majority of Americans would say, we can get behind that. But this is a different thing. And, you know, then they're in the Oval Office talking about sending American citizens to this, which, of course, has remnants of World War II and the Nazis. Then we've got the whole university thing. We've got the law. Like, people are talking about fake news. There's no fake news anymore because Trump's already killed all the fake news that he thinks is fake news. Left-leaning news media has been falling apart for a long time, and it's basically almost non-existent as far as having voices. And then you've got individuals who built their profiles who are now starting to talk in fear about the consequences of speaking up. So that's what we're talking about here. That's what we're seeing, you know. There's a lot of other examples, but Philip or Joe?
Well, I was going to say, perhaps everyone would feel a bit more comfortable to say America is undergoing early onset fascism.
Yeah.
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 Well, you know what makes it interesting, right? For me, because I left America back in the 1990s, right? I've been in Asia since the mid 90s now, but you know, it's interesting to see how it's changed so much, right? I mean, I arrived in the U.S. in 1975. I was 9 years old, came from Cambodia, knew nothing about America. You know, and the people there were wonderful, right? We were sponsored by a church. It was a Lutheran church. There was, you know, all about giving. It was about helping. And today, it's not recognizable to me. You know, you were talking about the process. Well, I think, if I'm not mistaken here, I think a lot of people who are moderate are going to say, well, Andrea, you know, the process hasn't worked. You looked at how many people have actually come into America illegally. You look at, you know, the process and how long it takes to get them back out, or why are they even allowed in the first place if the process works? So I think, you know, I try to be a bit more balanced about it and kind of say, well, maybe things have gone too far left, and then it's creating this reaction to go very far right. And I think we just need to give people room to come back to being moderates again. Because, you know, I mean, I remember having a conversation with one of my ex-bosses, and he's a Republican, you know, when I was in the US and I was an American, I was a Democrat. But the fact that we're both moderate on both sides, we agreed on most issues. And I think we need to bring that back.
Can I ask you something there, Philip? You said
Sure.
too far left as far as immigration goes, right? Is it a too far left issue, or is it a rule of law issue? Because it's not about being a citizen in the US. It's about being a human being in the US. You have protections under the law. And that's what's changing at the moment, right? That's the foundation that's being challenged.
I don't disagree.
That's not left or right.
It is about the rule of law. But the question then is, if there's a law about illegal immigration and legal immigration, why don't we enforce those laws? Right? I mean, look, don't get me wrong, right? I mean, I was a refugee myself, right? I mean, I appreciated the opportunity. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to go to America and live there, you know, because we had a war in Cambodia, right? We didn't have a choice. But we went through, I think, the legal route. So the question is, you know, when you think about rule of law, you got to think about it from both sides, right? I mean,
but you could be pulled up in America today and kicked out just because of that background, right?
Absolutely right.
That's what's happening. Yeah,
I agree with you. But the question is, how did it get here? That's my question, right? I mean, because I lived there from the 70s up until the 90s. And yeah, you can start to see things deteriorate. Yeah, you could, right? I mean, I think the biggest shocking thing for me was, you know, when I first got to the US, right? Because in Cambodia, you know, when you go into school, teachers there back in the 70s were still using canes on you, right? They can make you go stand outside in the sun. You know, you get to America, and, you know, what did I observe in my first or second year in school? It was the second year in school. I see a kid beating a teacher with a chair.
Wow.
right? And you're like going, whoa, how could this be happening, right? And then you kind of get, learn English and you kind of figure out what's going on there. And you find out that kids are telling themselves, I can do anything I want because I'm under 18. I'm protected. So, so for me, rule of law has to apply on both sides. And I think what could have happened is, you had all these people pushing so far on one end that you get in this reaction on the other end. And I think we just need to take the differences and kind of say, guys, let's not focus on those. Let's focus on the middle part, the moderate part. Let's focus on what we can agree on.
Yeah,
I'll stop there.
No, I think we're all very much in agreement. But it's the systemic failures across the polycrisis, right? So there's so many failures at play, and it's not just an overnight thing. I always say, as our world has been evolving, so 70s, 80s, 90s, heyday, Western civilization, more wealth, more stuff, more freedom, all that sort of stuff. But then it kept growing. So I always say, we had 500 million middle class people in the year 2000. We've got 3.8 billion middle class people today. No one ever sort of sat there and went, wait a minute, that's a lot of people that will have it. So we're already in the climate crisis, according to the scientists, in the 70s and the 80s. And we're going to add another, 2.2 billion people who can drive, fly, wear clothes, buy clothes, more clothes, and they eat red meat. What's going to be the consequence of that? Is it a good idea, right? And in the US, it's even more specific. Building neighborhoods, but not with long-term thinking, with short-term thinking, so that a lot of those neighborhoods now are falling apart. The schools are falling apart. The whole education system's falling apart. And if you don't focus on education, you don't have a future. Australia's education system has been suffering. The British education system's been suffering, right? Western democracies, they're not focusing on where they need to go in the long term. The debt's rising. It's become unmanageable. It's going to end in collapse. It's all just sort of coming together, and here we are, and it's all happening at the same time, and everyone's going, how did it all happen? And it's like, because no one was paying attention. Because big picture thinking has no place. It's quarterly,
Yeah, it's quarterly. You're right.
Well, the challenge really is this, right? I mean, if I'm going to be bold enough to say, I think on screen we have 4 people here who do think about the future quite a bit, do care about a lot of things, but there's also a reason why, well, maybe 3 of us aren't financially free to retire immediately, right? You decide amongst yourself who's the one who can. But the thing about this is that we know the important stuff, and even if we're aware, it's hard to look into the future that much and to be that cognizant. So it is actually a failure in design, if you like, right? We're not great at this. We're horrible at financial thinking. We're horrible at long-term stuff. Most of the things we know, it's only because we look back. Right? I mean, that's really the way it is. The people who talk about the future, yeah, they could be right, they could be wrong. There's an infinite number of wrong scenarios. There's only going to be one right? So that's unfortunately, it's one of those things where you go. I was thinking about a metaphor again, like whenever a bus crashes, we can do a number of things. We can go. Was it the bus driver? Was everybody on the bus culpable? Was it a tire? Was it the road design? And the answer might be a number of things all at once, right?
Yeah.
That's the way the world works. I mean, should we be on buses at all in the first place? That sort of thing. So we can only make the best decisions based on it. If a bus crashes, we can't uncrash the bus, but we can try and go like, okay, how do we look out for this not happening again? And maybe we think about whether we want to go on buses.
But to that point, it's interesting, right, Joe? Because you think about the financial system, you think about all the accidents that we've had. And each time we had an accident, you can look back and say, well, we were thinking too short term. We were taking, too much excessive risk. We used to talk about the Greenspan put all the time, thinking about, sort of the danger of having that put there. Now it's expected. So instead of learning and saying, hey, let's put the guardrails on, we've learned from it to say, hey, let's take the guardrails off. So I don't know, I think we've had so many experiences that we can look back to and say, gosh, we did it wrong that way. But even knowing what we did wrong, we kept doing it.
Yeah. I want to. So Ian McGilchrist, The Master and His Mystery. Have you guys ever read it?
No, I have not.
All right. So this is a good time to listen to philosophers, by the way,
Okay.
if you're not already. And his whole philosophy is around left brain, right brain thinking. And left brain thinking is the short term sort of thinking. Right brain thinking is the long term thinking, right? And basically, what's happened is the right brain's become. I'm sure I'm getting my rights and lefts right. Has become the servant to the, and the master has become the emissary, right?
Yeah.
And that's basically what he's saying, because where we are right now and how crazy it is right now, it's actually based on lots of things. It's going to get a lot crazier. So this is the next one that I wanted to. Naomi Klein and Astra Taylor published an article in The Guardian called "The Rise of End Times Fascism," and we started our show this year talking about this. At the time, I didn't know, but it was based on research by a fellow called Gil Duran, and he's basically talking about the Silicon Valley elite or dark MAGA. And I discovered this as I was trying to work out, how did I get the election result wrong? Donald Trump never had enough people to win the election through MAGA. They're only about 30%, right? So I was like, how did I get it wrong? How did I get it wrong? And Joe didn't get it wrong. Joe got it right because he was paying attention to this other group. And these are the tech bros and the crypto bros and all of that sort of stuff. So they have this vision to build these sort of cities and around the world where they're going to put the people in them that they like, and everybody else basically is out and they're on their own. And basically they're talking about basically they're going to destroy the earth in the process, but they're going to have these safe havens and these bunkers to run to, and everybody knows about their bunkers because it's been widely publicized, right? When I first started talking about it, I could tell people were looking at me like I was sharing a conspiracy theory, but it wasn't, because all of this information is public. Every plan that they have, they already have some of these places that exist, you know. There's a place called, what's it called? Prospera. I've talked about Praxis before, but Prospera is this island off Honduras where they built this gated community, right? So these places already exist. But what's really interesting, and where I think the opportunity might lie, is they've actually merged with the Christian fundamentalists and the Zionists, who are on the so they're sort of pushing for the rapture, right? The end of times, and the good people are going to go up, and it's going to be wonderful, and the rest of us who aren't good, although I figure we'd be good, we don't get to go there. So, but basically, there's also stories about artificial intelligence. There is no way that artificial intelligence can develop to its full capacity and become like a godlike creature without destroying the earth, right? So this article is just fascinating, and it really goes into detail, and I really want to recommend that everybody reads it. I'll put it in my weekend reads. I'll feature it. But these groups are basically saying, in the past, the Armageddon complex, like Hitler, all that sort of stuff, they had a vision for a golden age after the bloodbath, right? That was always there. And what they're saying for now is there's no vision for the future that everyone can move towards, because it's only for a select few. And that's what I think people are missing. You know, there's a story being shaped about our future, and it doesn't include all of us. And we've got to get on board with what this story is and say, do we want that? And if we don't want that, then we need to say, okay, I want to shape a new future and come together. And so that's the big push. I don't know if you're noticing it. There's a much bigger push. There's a lot more people standing up and speaking up. Ray Dalio speaking up. You know, he's a conservative head fringe leader, right? He's speaking up. There's a story here that we've got on that. But the governing ideology of the far right in our age of escalating disasters has become a monstrous supremacist survivalism. So that's what they're focused on. So they say these developments have accelerated. So first of all, they've accelerated because of Donald Trump. It was a unique opportunity for this group to move from the backseat, the freaks, the weirdos, into the front. They've got access to the White House, right? But first of all, they're saying the reason what's happening is the climate crisis. So a lot of these people are still publicly denying the crisis while building bunkers, right? So they're saying one thing in public and acting privately. The second one is COVID. They'd long predicted that something like this would happen, and the arrival of it was taken by many of the powerful people as a sign that we have officially arrived at what US military analysts forecasted as the age of consequences. And the third factor is the rapid advancement and adoption of AI, along obviously associated with sci-fi, but basically, that's the kind of thing. So that's where it all comes to. But I want to give you some hope. So it finishes with what we've got to do about it. First, we've got to help each other. We've got to face the depth of the depravity. That's how they've phrased it, that has gripped the hard right in all countries. To move forward with focus, we must first understand this simple fact. We are up against an ideology, and it is an ideology, that is given up not only on the premise and promise of liberal democracy, but on the livability of our shared world. So first of all, we're going to do that. And the second one is we've got to counter their apocalyptic narratives with a far better story about how to survive the hard times ahead without leaving anyone behind. So it's a really interesting piece. The story that we started talking about back in January, Joe, it started to move into the mainstream media. So it's moved from so-called fringe, because when I was reading it, I'm like, this isn't fringe, this is out there. The interviews on mainstream media, they've been talking about this for years. It's here. So I thought that was an interesting one to highlight.
Joe, I can see you want to say something. Please do, and I have some thoughts on this.
Well, actually, what I was doing is I was watching you guys' faces and thinking what's going through your minds. I could see Cohen reaching for the like trying to see where emotionally he was going as well. When I keep thinking about this in a number of ways. For me, my brain is terrible. I think about comedy all the time, and I always think about people who are doing things like prepping for end times. Why do they want to live so well on the way there? As in, why do you have to have a bunker? Just if you're going to a better place, it doesn't matter where you are, right? And the other thing about it was about we look at things sometimes from a perspective of binary outcomes. They have to be this, they have to be that, right?
Exactly.
And really, it's about risk management, right? So I'm actually okay if you have the means to do some risk management and go like, well, the world could go to hell, and I would like to be comfortable in that situation. And you could be wrong about that, right? I mean, nobody looks around at a bunker and go like, oh, these are nice digs. Because I've been hearing about them and go like, oh, okay, so it's your chance really in America to live in old HDB buildings, right? I mean, that's what it is. And you go like, oh, okay, and with guns, but it's just an idea, and it appeals to some, and most of it, I mean, it really is marketing, right? If somebody is out there selling spades at scale, if this idea is catching on, yeah, sure, I'm going to do that, right? But you don't necessarily have to do that. I mean, like I buy life insurance with the full determination I'm not going to use it, but who knows? So it doesn't mean that just because they're prepping for it that it's going to happen or that's what they want out of it. I think there's a different kind of thing there. So there's some people I know you're saying that some people. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to share something about where you're asking where we're going with this, right? And thank you very much for allowing me to jump back right in, because I've been keeping quiet for the last 20 minutes because I think Philip has lived in the United States. He's got a lived experience of how United States was back in the past, and I think he's got a great perspective about are we too far right now. I personally want to say that the point that you brought up, Andrea, and you said that article was fascinating read. I think sometimes our brains cannot process all the information, and our brains capture information that we like. And sometimes a lot of this content that is being put out there is necessarily, catastrophizing. right? It's kind of apocalyptic, catastrophizing, sensationalized. And sometimes, we need to also guard our brains. We need to guard our minds. I think in moments like that, we need to stay stoic. We need to stay, being able to stay right in the middle, find our balance, right? It's like if our brain catches onto some of these sensationalized, catastrophizing messages, we need to ask ourselves, what is it about us that captures, that latches onto these kind of things? And for me, I want to be unapologetically idealistic. I am trained in appreciative inquiry and positive psychology, and I still see that the best way for us to move forward as a humankind is not this whole idea of bloodbath and fighting and tech bros. I think these tech bros can take as many cold baths as they want. They can go to hell. I don't care. But the thing is this: I really want to really, I still want to be unapologetically united. We as a human race would only do better when we come together, when we put our heads together, when we collaborate, where we share some compassion, some empathy towards each other, to better understand each other and coexist. Because at the end of the day, I don't care what you say, right? It's like the Americans, if with enough purchasing power, want to buy a better Bordeaux wine, like a Californian, a wine, just doesn't. It's not the same as a Bordeaux wine, right? You want a Bordeaux, you want a Bordeaux. You want a Chianti, you want a Chianti, right? So I think the world is much better if we can trade. The world is much better if we put our heads together. The world is much better if we really just think of how we can lift everybody up together. Like the raising tides will raise all the ships. So I'm still very much unapologetically idealistic. And I think that some of these very negative views of the future are overly sensationalized. I get a headache. I get a splitting headache just listening to all that.
Okay, this is so interesting, Cohen, right? Because I don't actually see this as catastrophizing at all, because the real catastrophizing stuff is, that's out there, but it's on a whole new level with a whole bunch of people. But if you don't know your enemy, how can you respond?
Okay, I'm going to jump in here. So, Andrew, you made a very interesting comment earlier. You said, the MAGA supporter was only like, what, 30%?
Yeah. And
yet Trump got voted in.
Yeah.
So what's the story? I remember listening to one of your earlier podcasts, and you said, I just don't understand this phenomenon in America, right? Where people are supporting Trump. So my view on that is really quite simple, right? It's the lesser of two evils. I mean, America was founded on Protestants, who went there from Europe. Or I should say it was founded. I mean, obviously the Native Americans were there, and I don't want to get canceled or anything. But the whole thing with America and the European migration and all that, and the starting of the sort of bringing over the Protestant work ethic and approach worked well. It worked well for a long, long time. Now, what happened, right? And to me, it's pretty simple. When I heard that the evangelicals were voting and supporting Trump in that first term election, I had to ask myself, what the heck is going on here, right? This is not the kind of man that we talked about at church, but yet they supported him. So the only conclusion that I came up with was we have basically two choices. And if you're a believer in God and you believe in values and you believe in all the things American, then you're sitting here going, I can talk about God in church, in a school, or I can't, right? And who do I vote for if those are the only two choices I have? So again, I go back to this idea that, we need to come back and find something in common. And that I don't want to go too far with the extreme and saying that this is the way it is. Because like I said, again, when I go back to America, and I rarely go back anymore, but when I do, and I talk to people there, a lot of them are moderates. I mean, they're not all out there, trying to build bunkers, right? A majority of people are not. So what I worry about.
Have you listened to Steve Bannon? He's got a whole product line for bunkers, right? So the MAGA, so it's the MAGA movement. Steve Bannon's there. He's their champion. Sure. Then you've got, so the conclusion is it's the tech bros and the crypto bros who took Trump over the 50% or close to 50%, right? Why would they do that?
Money.
Because he
What
gave
else?
them what they want. Why did the Christians vote for him? Because he gave them what they wanted, right? The whole abortion thing in the first round.
Yeah, exactly.
He gave them what they want. So he's capable of giving people what they want, which is why people vote for him. But this isn't a catastrophizing story. This is a open our eyes, pay attention, what's going on, who's really in charge? Is it Trump? I don't believe so. I think there's three groups behind him. It's Project 2025, Christian nationalism, and the tech bros, or the tech, what do they call it? The tech Reich. That's what Gil Durant. Those three groups are behind him. My hope is that those three eventually, even though they're aligned and they're fighting for similar interests, at some point that unity will fall apart because they're not ultimately aligned. And so that's my hope, that they will ultimately fall apart, but they're going to do a lot of damage in the meantime. And that's what we're witnessing now. Some of the stuff, all of the different fights that are going on, all of the different attacks against the rule of law. It's coming from a lot of different places. I'm fully into finding the middle ground. I'm all about that. But I don't think we're living in a time where the middle ground is winning, because we're not winning. We've got extremists on both sides. I don't think it's a left or a right thing. We've got extremists who are defining the story of our time. And that's what we've got to focus on, rather than saying we've just got to have dinner parties and agree with each other. And, we've got to listen to our MAGA relative. We've got to listen to our free thinking relative. It's not about that anymore. There are movements that are incredibly powerful. They're very, very public, and we're not paying attention to it because we can't conceive of this. That's where I think we're going to fail. So my hope, Cohen, is in 70% of the world's population are good people, but that 70% of the world's population are quiet now. They're quiet. They've gone away. They've left social media. They don't want to get involved.
Can I say something as well about that? I think even social media. I think I lay the blame on social media. Right? Social media really is a factory of sensationalization. I think even Joe recently, I think a week ago, made a LinkedIn post about how certain posts that are very sensational, big headlines and everything are capturing all the views. And then all the posts, the people who actually put an effort to write, to think, to be moderate, to be balanced, to be, kind of balanced in their approach in arguing both emotionally and mental and intellectually. These posts gets like very little views, very little comments, very little engagements. The kind of posts that go viral are the sensational ones, right? So that I think social media is a sensational machine, and we are a generation that is fed on a diet, or daily diet on social media. What is the first thing you do on the first thing you wake up in the morning? Most people check their social media, right? So, and now we are actually seeing social media politics playing out, right? The way Trump is leading, right? It's all headlines, right? He's going for the spectacular headlines rather than sound economic policies. And I really think that that's really quite worrying for me. Like for me, we are a generation that just feeds on sensationalization. I'm concerned about that. I don't have a solution to that, but I'm just concerned about that. Maybe Philip, you have some thoughts around this.
Well, I kind of ask myself the question, right? We talk about Trump being put into place, and we got to ask ourselves, what is it that made it possible? Mm-hmm. Now, I'm from Cambodia, and I remember having this conversation years ago with one of the guys that used to work for World Bank, and he was a Cambodian sort of representative, right? And we were just talking about this, and he said to me, he goes, yeah, if 10% of the money actually gets to the actual use, that would be great, right? I'm thinking to myself, wow, that's kind of crazy, right? You put $100 in, 10%, $10 get to the right places, and it works. And then I'm asking myself, it's about money. So then you go to the US and you say to yourself, well, what does it take to get elected these days, right? It takes an enormous amount of money. So what creates that environment, right? We have this thing called lobbying in America. Now, it's gotten to the point now where it's not under the line anymore. It's blatant, right? I mean, we talk about Musk and his giving them money, and all of a sudden he's in and so forth. So again, I ask myself these questions, right? If we want to fix the system, we got to think about, what motivates these things to happen. And if we have a system that it allows people to buy influence, and we don't stop that, then I don't see how we're going to ever get to a solution that's viable for everyone, because you're always going to have the people who've got the money to be able to buy what they want, and the rest of us, whether it's 60, 70, 80%, really don't have a say. So for me, that's the big worrying part, right? And I like to be optimistic, Cohen. I have to be optimistic, right? I've got kids, you know, so I need to think on their behalf and find ways out of this. But we've got to think about that system where money is running everything, including the election cycle in the U.S. now.
Yeah, I agree. And Cohen, I'm sorry, we can't just blame social media for everything.
Yeah.
These problems have happened in societies before social media even existed. So there's a historical sort of precedent for this before social media. The problem with social media is obviously the algorithms driving the rage and the outrage and stuff. And we have to start taking some responsibility for that. You know, like people, if you're constantly in a rage state when you're on social media, that's not a good thing for you. It's not a good thing for your family, for your mental health, right? And a lot of people are, you know, and they really, you see it all the time in our own communities. People, I'm like, chill, man, you know. But it's.
I'm not blaming social media. Yeah, I'm not blaming social media. I'm saying that
it's a strategy.
No, but social media is one,
and it's money,
this, right? Yeah,
but it's also money, because it's more eyeballs, more clicks, more advertising revenue. It's always about money.
Yeah. But look at what Joe has said earlier on, right? I think his YouTube algorithm has kind of like, he has really trained his YouTube algorithm to send me certain kind of messages, right? Social media is a self-serving thing. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a confirmation bias, right? So if I watch 5 videos about something about, okay, Steve just destroyed Trump, Chinese social media just destroyed, love it. And if I watch this kind of sensational headlines, and then with a very nice thumbnail with an angry person like middle finger or something, ta-da, it's like, there you go. It's like, it's very easy to go down this rabbit hole, right? And what happens is that I become trained onto that, and I became entrained onto that. I become numb to that, and I don't even realize that I'm in that. And so we are all trapped into that kind of space, and that's the reason why people are so extremist, right? People who support Donald Trump are so extremist. People who hate Donald Trump are so extremist. It's like there's almost very little intellectual discord anymore. And what Philip said earlier on is about the moderation, and the US, the governance is really built about debate, about quality intellectual debate, like what's best for our country moving forward. And for almost a century, right, the United States have led the way in terms of thought around economics. Like I said, they have been writing all those textbooks that I studied when I was in school. And so I think for me, it's about that dislocation for me as well. Like, I've been studying all these textbooks, and the podcasts I listen to are American podcasts. The authors, the writers that I learned from are American writers, American authors. Some of the best literature around psychology, philosophy are from the United States. And it just beggars belief. That's why I'm still having this dislocation of how it has all gone so pear-shaped. With regards to all of that, right? Maybe I'm a little simplistic or idealistic, but I'm definitely not laying the blame on social media. I'm saying that it is a representation of how far we have fallen.
Yeah.
If I can give a perspective
Joe
on this,
knows,
right?
but I was just going to say, Joe knows that his feed's been changed, right? The problem is the majority of people don't know. That's the problem. And that's what we need to change, right? Sorry, Joe.
No, I was just going to say, the thing about social media and why it feels like it's such an affront to us is it's like, when you talk about stuff like all the books you all the great books, or a great number of the great books and policies and ideas, right? We tend to forget, and back in the old days, we used to actually have a distorted view of the world. We were surrounded with ideas from a very few people. That and because other elites sort of said, okay, well, this we know enough. This guy knows a bit more, and we'll put that forward and all that. And that view became the big view, and so the idea or the feeling that America was this, first of all, if you think about all the Ivy League schools and you think about education and you're in academia, you would imagine America to be a very different place to what it is when you get there. right? Just like when I went to Los Angeles for the first time, and I was thinking, oh, here I am in the land of, it's Hollywood. It's where all the stuff is done. This is the room where it happens. And I went there and I thought, I'll listen to local radio. And I went, wow, this is terrible. Because what we see, what we consume, and what we hold in high regard is literally the best. So our beliefs about the world very seldom is based on what the actual world is. I came to terms with it some time ago when I thought for a while that I was poor, and I felt, oh man, I'm struggling, and then I realized, oh, hang on, wait, I'm already in the top 5% earning in Singapore, and I went, okay, I better shut up for a while, because perspective can misinform, because all you see is what you project in terms of what you've interpreted. So you look at economics and you go like, well, but you forget that's literally one person's view based on what they've seen and what they understood. And there's a lot to be said about what other people think. A lot of people can be wrong at the same time. They can be uninformed at the same time. But to think about the idea that we can all come together and unite, for me, I think that's the worst kind of situation. You don't want in a situation where the bus is going out of control and everybody drives. That's not going to be the solution.
I mean,
we can get to consensus, right? So one of the alternatives for democracy is the idea of what are they called? So, Paris, they've got fantastic civilian communities that come together. It's kind of like that, but it's happening all over the world, where they come together, they get educated about the issues in the world, and they come up with recommendations for the government, who may or may not implement them. And one of them was like, any train trip over less than 5 hours, you should go on any flight where you could get there on a train less than 5 hours, you should go on a train. I think they brought it down to 2 hours, right? What are they? Civil assemblies. And so these are taking off around the world, right? And they're fantastic. But consensus is what we're lacking, because it's not about, I want to fight for this and you want to fight for that. The idea of democracy is to achieve consensus, where you win sometimes, but you don't win every time.
That's absolutely right. And we have to accept that, right? I mean, democracy means that the majority wins.
Yeah.
Now,
right.
The question but
that's not what's happening now. That's the totalitarian thing. This is what we're doing. The Christian approach. You have to follow. You have to do this because this is what we believe. No, but I'm an atheist. That's what's changing, right?
Yeah. I mean, to Cohen's point earlier about, sort of this idea of what America is and all the learnings that you get. And kind of, I reflect back on like when I was growing up, right? And I'm not sure if you guys get the same program in Australia or in Singapore, but, every single show I watched had similar values, right? It didn't matter whether it was Bugs Bunny or Little House on the Prairie or Starsky and Hutch. They all had the same value system, right? Community, telling the truth, coming together and helping each other out. Well, I don't see that around anymore.
But that was also a bit of propaganda too, right?
It might have been.
Because it wasn't everyone's reality.
Well, but it sets a standard, I think, for people, right? And it's sort of like, now I can't even find programs that are neutral, right? I mean, now you got programs that are telling you to do all the wrong things, right? You got biker gangs that are heroes. You've got a professor or teacher who becomes a drug dealer, and and to me, it's like, where do we go back to values, right? Where do we go back to values? And the scary part for me is that today when I look around, the only place I can find it in is what? It's in the religious institution. There really aren't too many other places left.
Yeah. No, community values. So we've lost that, right? We're on devices. We're not with each other. So that's one of the biggest focus areas that I'm seeing being pushed forward. If you're a man, you've got to get out there in your community and help the young men in your community, because they're in pain. They're in pain, and it's not looking good for them. And if it doesn't look good for them, it doesn't look good for anyone else. I always had this term in Pakistan, and it basically means men who stand against walls. And if you go to Pakistan, you go to India, there's just thousands and thousands of men just standing around leaning against walls. They've got nothing to do. They've got no jobs, no work, because and that's not good for any society. There's more violence. There's more violence towards women. There's more rape. There's all those things, right? And within our own societies, this is becoming a problem. The incel culture, we're seeing the whole adolescence response, right? So we've all become disconnected from community, from each other. Within families, we sit around and have a meal. Friends come over and they go, "Oh wow, you guys are having a meal and no one's got their phone on." I'm like, "Well, of course we are. This is the only time we get to be together. Doesn't everybody do this?" No, right? You see pictures of the modern American family. There's 5 people in a room and everyone's on a different device watching something different. So there's no common experience anymore, right? So I totally agree with you, Philip, and that's something we can change. We can change it. We can say this isn't good for us. This isn't good for us. So let's come together and change. If you ask the majority of people who are raging at the world, are you happy? Why aren't you happy? Oh, because of no. Take them out of it. Let's go closer to home. Why aren't you happy? And they're lonely. They're disconnected. They haven't got any friends. There's no meaning in their life. There's all that sort of stuff. And that's what I think technology's taken away. And I've been in the tech industry most of my life, and I've watched it, and I've asked questions. Is this a good idea? We need to ask that question more often. Is this a good idea?
But here's the thing, right? I mean, like you were saying earlier about social media, right? I mean, you can't push it all on social media, because social media is a medium of doing something, right? The question is, well, what is the intent of society? When you put something in place, the use of social media, technology. I mean, in one of my chapters, I wrote about Keynes, right? John Maynard Keynes. And I think he wrote this piece back about 100 years ago, a little bit more than 100 years ago, and 1930, I believe it was. And he basically said, given technology, given innovation, given the human sort of need to keep improving, he said in 100 years' time, I think the average person is going to work 15 hours a week. Now, my question is, was he wrong? Was he right? And if he was wrong, what was he wrong about? I mean, I think technology, the use of technology and everything else, right? The internet and all that has really gave us an opportunity to be so much more productive. And we've created so much wealth. I can't remember the numbers now, but I think between then and now, adjusted for inflation, I think global GDP is up like 20 times. So the question is not whether technology is great for efficiency. The question is, how do we divide the fruits of those efficiencies across, society? And so if we don't focus on that aspect of it, and we keep looking at, blaming social media, technology, and everything else, I think we're kind of missing it, right? We got to think about how are we using it, and what are we thinking collectively as being the right way to use to get the labor of the productivity, the benefit of productivity, and share it equally.
Okay, first of all, I just want to clarify, right? What I think I'm getting a little pushback from the panelists here around me blaming social media. I don't think things in such a simplistic manner. I'm not talking about social media. I'm talking about our brains. Our brains have been conditioned to go for sensational, because the constant drone of social media is droning. So whenever our minds go for what's outstanding, right? If you see green trees, red flowers, nothing special. You see a purple elephant, right? Your brain goes straight to that. Right, so anything that is sensational, our brains go to it, and so because of our appetite for sensationalism, and that if we want to backtrack the logical that's how we come to elect Donald Trump into office, because that guy is a sensational machine. He is great at sensational things. He does sensational things, right? So that's to complete my point, and to your point about Philip, and I thank you for bringing that in about productivity. I would say that social media is an amplifier. If you are a person with a kind, generous heart, you genuinely want to do good, social media can become voice, that amplification machine for your kindness, your generosity. But if you are a person who just wants to get attention, right, that also becomes an amplification for your attention. And we see teenagers doing all kinds of dangerous stunts just to get eyeballs, just to get attention, because again, sensational wins over logic at any given time. Sensational wins over moderation. And so the question right now is more than just building bunkers. It's about building bunkers for our minds, building filters for our minds. How can we see beyond sensational and really still hold on to the moderate intellectual discourse and the values that we talked about that we hold to be very dear. That's very much part of our human existence, very much part of our existence within a broader society. And to agree with you, I agree with you, Philip. I am still hopeful for America because I don't live in America like you, but I have many friends in America. I've been in America almost 10 times in my life, and every time I go there, it's a long time. I go there for long learning trips. I go there for certification programs because I am a big fan of the American, like I said, the literati and the scholars of America. I'm still a big fan of all this, right? So I am still hopeful for America. I hope that America would one day find an equilibrium. Maybe this is just a shock to the system. If you see over the years, like the UK, the UK empire has fallen, and then the American empire has taken over. Is this the moment? Is this a moment that we are seeing a change in power, or can America still find its way back again? I am still hopeful, because much as I'm disturbed by what's happening, the reason why is because I'm not trying to be Pollyanna here, but I'm just saying that I'm still hopeful because that's the way. I don't know if that's a coping mechanism, but I'm hopeful still. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to talk. I'm just being hopeful for what has existed before. I don't know if that's a good strategy for now, because I think you're going to be facing with disappointment. I think a wake-up call. Look, we all know America's got the capability of turning this around and sanity to prevail. But the reality is this isn't just about the US, right? It's a symptom of what's going on in the wider world, right? There's lots of issues in the world that we're dealing with that are impacting every country, and obviously America gets the centerpiece of that because it's the country that's been driving the world since World War II, right? But it's not going to be the same going forward, no matter what we do.
Well, I was going to say, if we bring it back to the topic of China, U.S., I mean, the way I see China, and I have to admit that I'm not very knowledgeable about China, right? I haven't been there for a few years now, and I don't speak Chinese, so it's a lot of stuff I can't absorb. I can't learn about things in China because of the language barrier. But if you look at the way the Chinese government has been running things, right? Very strategic. We talk about things like, why did they stop all these tuition centers or whatever that was going on there? To me, it kind of makes sense, right? They're trying to manage it so that things don't get crazy, right? I mean, you got, the real estate sector going nuts, people going crazy with greed and everything. They're saying, hey, we got to stop it at some point. Yeah. So I am hopeful outside of the US with places like China, where they do think beyond just, making as much money as possible, as quickly as possible, and driving things strategically as a nation. So I'm also optimistic about China. And I just hope that, both countries can come to realize that they can coexist.
Yeah. And that's a global deal, right? How are we going to run the world moving forward based on all of the issues that we face and the risks that we face from a planetary perspective? So we need to design a new world no matter what. As far as I'm concerned, no matter what, we can't keep going the way we're going. We're going to go off the edge no matter what. So this is an opportunity for a reset, but it's not going to be the same as what we've experienced. So I think getting comfortable with the idea of that, I think, is a healthy thing, because if you're going to hold on to what we've already had, that adjustment's going to be a lot harder to make. Ray Dalio sort of spoke up this week, and he sort of talked about the top 5 issues. So Joe and Philip, Ray Dalio and what he means in the world. Do you want to, one of you want to share why it's important that he spoke up?
I'll let Joe do that. I mean, I just know that Roy Dalio from the fact that I was in the finance industry, and he's very well known in the sort of hedge fund world and all that. But I'll let Joe take this one.
conservative?
no, I'm going to say that all I have with him is a reputation, right? So again, it's a consensus on who is an expert. And in the current climate, for anyone to come out and say something opposite to what is being put out there in terms of executive decisions is a big deal. So and he's not the only one as well. So there are a few now who are stepping across the line. But I think the interesting thing was that the very first of them that stepped across the line to say something was bad actually pulled it back very quickly. And I thought that was going to be the end of that. But now you had the rest of Ray Dalio, and I think you had the head of BlackRock as well, and you had people coming forward whose opinion has some sway, and they've been unequivocal, saying that like, this is not good. It's a real bad turn if we've taken that right now. I think Ray Dalio is also he's just a bit more eloquent and has a way of putting things, and so he's been able to communicate the idea in a way that resonates.
Interestingly, like the insurance one that was talking about the climate crisis and the impact on insurance a few weeks ago, also posted on LinkedIn for the first time as an article. So it looks like LinkedIn is becoming an interesting place for these sort of opinions. But he brought up 5 risks. The monetary economic order is breaking down.
Yeah.
The domestic political order is breaking down. That's obviously just for the US, but it's probably relevant in other countries. Number 3, the international geopolitical world order is breaking down. Number 4, acts of nature, droughts, floods, and pandemics are increasingly disruptive. He didn't put any description in that. That's all he said. So he obviously is not sitting there from a perspective of, he's talking about extreme weather events and pandemics, not all of the different reasons for it. And then number 5, amazing changes in technology such as AI will be highly impactful to all aspects of life. So they were the 5. And there's some interesting responses to that. But one of was Ernesto van Peebles, I don't know how to say his name, and he wrote, "Can we confirm we are in collapse?" This is his response to it. And I just want to read a little bit from it. The result: a civilization losing coherence, a culture that no longer trusts its institutions, can't distinguish signal from noise, and has more information than it has meaning, which goes with what you were saying, Cohen. It requires us to fundamentally change how we relate to nature, to each other, to knowledge, to power. We need to remember that we are a species in relationship, radically interdependent, embedded in ecosystems, co-creators of reality. We need to move from extraction to regeneration, from fragmentation to coherence, from domination to reciprocity. And we need a new kind of intelligence, not just artificial intelligence, relational intelligence, ecological intelligence, emotional intelligence. He goes on and it's a beautifully written piece. It's not about the survival of the fittest. It's about birthing something new, and that's a term you're going to start hearing a lot. That what we've created has gotten us to this point, and right across the world, it's breaking down geopolitically, technologically. Our soil is dying. Our oceans are dying. Trump just approved a massive a marine protected area for fishing again. We've got to keep our fish in the sea. He's saying, we need to be the biggest seafood market in the world. No, you're not going to beat China. You can't build ships fast enough to beat China. So stop. It's just bullshit, right? But yeah, so this conversation is really starting, and it's becoming. I attended an online course last night. It's becoming stronger. It's becoming more powerful, and business people are speaking up who you wouldn't normally expect it. Environmentalists are speaking up in a different way, but people who've never sort of stepped forward are speaking up. So I think I take hope in that, the voices that are coming forward now, as a voice that's been there for a long time. So
yeah. Well, I just hope that the actions follow the words. We talk a lot about all these things, climate, but we're still pushing ahead with. I mean, let's take Singapore, right? We're pushing big ahead with some big, I think the next big what do you call it? A concert is coming, so we're gonna have people flying in again, and So we'll see. I mean, I do buy into the fact that we need to do all these things. I just hope that it's more than just words.
All right, David's here. Yeah, no, agreed. Look, we can have Lady Gaga flying in and doing a big mega concert for a few days, and everyone flies in, but we can't have the fun. We can't have the aerospace, not aerospace. That industry. We can't have it growing like 10% year on year for the next 50 years, right? That's what we can. So like, let's just come to an agreement. We can keep this little bit that we all love, but we can't have all of that. So there's enough clothes on the planet to clothe the next 6 generations of people. We've got a problem with our textile industry. We need to resolve it. Cheyenne and Temu both basically stopped advertising on social media in the US and have announced price hikes. So that's a good thing. As far as reducing fast fashion, it's not good for the people who are making the fast fashion. But Mark Zuckerberg and other owners of social media have lost the revenue from these Chinese fast fashion giants. So, that's one of those sort of repercussions, but it's a repercussion that always needed to happen. But the people that will suffer the most aren't the people that were doing the 100 purchases from Cheyenne and doing TikTok videos on it. It's the people who are making those garments. But at least we hope in China the government takes care of its people. Yep. So, but yeah, it's big and complicated, right? So David just said Ray Dalio's piece is he had in total just 30 words, to say about climate change. So I think the key thing was he mentioned it, but he obviously didn't understand how to talk about it in a way that was meaningful. But other people then picked that story up. But I thought it was, it's exactly right, David.
I think Jeffrey Sachs spoke very, very eloquently about both the economic situation as well as a climate crisis at Antalya, I think, Economic Forum or something. Yeah, you should watch that on YouTube as well. I've been watching that, and I think Jeffrey Sachs, who's an American economist and a public policy analyst and a professor at Columbia University, I think he's one of the most eloquent commentators about what's going on at the moment. I think the real issue right now, all this economic war is just distracting us from the real thing that's going to affect us human beings, which is the climate crisis.
Yeah, and Jeffrey Sachs is great because he's got James Hansen under his team, and he just released a report this week. So if you thought it wasn't going to get any hotter, or it's going to cool down because there's a change, no, it's going to stay the same. So I don't know. So I was in Thailand for the last 2 years when it got really, really hot, and it actually scared me. So we'll just move on to the climate stuff, if that's all right. Yeah. I haven't heard people in Thailand. I always keep an eye on it. Cambodia, Laos, Malaysia, even Indonesia. I haven't heard that talk around heat that we saw for the last couple of years. So I don't think this heat season has been as bad. The report that came out from Copernicus in Europe, February and March wasn't as hot. It didn't break the records. It's still hot, right? But they do expect 2025 to be as hot, if not hotter, but would definitely be above 1.5 warming. Europe's like warming twice as fast as the rest of the world, so it's one of those regions. But India and Pakistan have got early heat waves hitting. Now, when the heat waves first hit, if it's not expected, and they're 5, 6, 7, 8 degrees above average, the first few weeks are actually dangerous because people aren't used to the heat, so it takes time to adjust. But the Balochistan, what are they? They've been getting up to 49 degrees Celsius right now, and that's like 120 Fahrenheit, which is like living in Death Valley. So completely unsurvivable. But there's a piece in CNN that talks about it, and they're saying extreme heat has killed tens of thousands of people in India and Pakistan in recent decades, and climate experts have warned that by 2050, India will be among the first places where temperatures cross survivability limits. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's already crossed survivability limits. The fact that it hasn't been like crazily worse is because we haven't quite hit that bit where the electricity infrastructure melts. But that could be this year or next year. and that's when you're going to get to see mass deaths, because you can't run air conditioning. We already know that they're using an incredible amount of coal to pump that energy so people can have air conditioning to get through these. Singapore, we had 188 above wet bulb temperatures last year. So this region, we're already well into dangerous wet bulb temperatures. So I get really frustrated by the conservative nature of media, but it's also climate scientists who are saying this, because it's not right. We're already here. The other thing is a waste one. So, excuse me, Coca-Cola said it was going to make 25% of its soda bottles returnable or refillable by 2030, and a material target for recycling of 50%. So it went crazy and told the world. It's now basically removed it from its website, hoping nobody would notice, but it has noticed. And a recent study, you're going to love this, found that we all have 5 plastic bottle caps of plastic in our brains. Cool, huh?
It explains some thoughts I've had.
Like this one, and here's some of the things that it causes: cognitive decline, reproductive concerns, immune system disruption, memory loss, hormonal disruptions, developmental problems in children. Well, look at that. All of these things that have been going up, right? This is plastic. They're saying it's decades old plastic, so it's not a new problem. It's an existing problem that, this is one of those hundreds, thousands of years problems that we're going to have to solve, right? So it's not just the world's getting warmer. How do we stop that? Can we stop it? Physics is going to keep doing what it's doing, right? Then we've got all these waste, the novel entities, right? How do we get forever chemicals out of the environment, out of our bodies? What are the impact? We don't really know. Plastics in our body, babies born, breast milk, plastics, right? So we've got some big problems. They're going to take a long time, or maybe the tech bros are right, and survival of the fittest, and Elon Musk will keep having his legion of children, and that's gonna be our we've got to get our heads around it. It's a big, complex problem. It's going to take a long time to fix it. I'm fighting for my kids, like Philip's fighting for his. But yeah, some big stuff going on in the climate.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So the pollen storm that has knocked out many people I know. So many have never had hay fever before, basically. So I was just reading a piece. When I lived in the States, I had ragweed allergies, and I'd never had an allergy in my life until I was 29. I didn't even know what was happening. And ragweed's a really big pollen in the US, right? You must know that, Philip. It's now expanded across the Northern Hemisphere. It's also in the South. But as temperatures rise, the way pollen interacts with the environment, there's more of it. And then you have, in thunderstorms, more pollen can come up. And in Melbourne, there was a big thunderstorm that all the pollen went nuts, and people were dying because they couldn't breathe. And there was such an emergency. So pollen and hay fever, if you've got a problem with hay fever, it's expected to get a lot worse. All right, come on. Someone gives me some thoughts on the planetary crisis.
I think plastic bottles are in my brain and very foggy now.
Well, I was going to say, about doing the right thing is always such a difficult thing, right? I mean, you remember when it was the right thing to have biodegradable stuff, right? And that's why we've got all this plastic, is because it all biodegrades and becomes microplastic, and then it gets into our systems. So, at one point you go like, okay, this is the right thing to do. And then you figure out, oh no, that's going to be bad for that, right? So I think the best you can do sometimes is to take responsible decisions and move towards the general direction of the right way to do things. To be a bit kind with yourself if you don't do it 100%. I mean, like for me, I'm a meat eater, even though I know there's a problem. I do cut back. I do. We can do different things that can help along the way. I look at air travel, for instance, and you go like, all right, you know what? It's a real challenge to do it the way we do, and if we grow, it's not going to be a good thing. But there are actually two kinds of technologies that we're not using to fly, which actually could work, but has some risk along that. First of all, there are actually electric planes that could work, but nobody wants to run out of power halfway on that one. And there's actually been a design for nuclear planes from way back, but again, not a very popular option. But if all those things come together and we figure things out like that, I mean, a hydrogen powered plane, for instance, if we can really figure it out, would make a real difference as to what that technology is all about. I mean, I think you've mentioned before, right? You've known about technologies that could radically change aerospace for the longest time. It's just not been used. So the revolution that we're seeing right now with cars, for instance, even that revolution began 100 years ago. The electric car is literally older than the combustion engine.
Yeah.
And it's about how we solve the problem and how we make it work. So I know that it's not always a popular thing but I very much believe ingenuity tends to solve the problems. Now we can't rely absolutely that these things are going to work, but I know that people are working on the solutions. I've been watching how people have been working on things like capturing carbon, and that it works so well they don't want to tell the world that it's working because they don't want people to start thinking that they don't have to worry about it anymore. But there are certain things that are coming our way which I think could really make a difference, and I think the way we generate power could make a real big difference. There's a way we've got to figure things around the politics of it all, right? I mean, people who are behind coal don't want to have nuclear fission really work, but that's just about the best possible thing for everybody. If we could make energy so cheap that it's practically free, and if done correctly, almost as safe as you could ever produce any kind of electricity.
But the problem with electricity, and David always talks about this actually, is that we've never reduced our demand of electricity when we've got electricity available to us. So if you look at the energy demand, it's grown, and all of these sustainable energy sources have been added to it, but it's still grown. Right? So we never actively choose to reduce our energy. And so and that's what we need to start doing, right? So I mean, you talk about getting on a nuclear plane. It's 50 plus degrees Celsius. So I talked to a fireman. At what point does it get too hot for the engines to be able to run? Haven't hit that point yet. At what point, so I know that electricity starts sort of melting at about 50 degrees Celsius. I know that solar panels start melting at about 6 degrees Celsius, right? At what point can all of these ideas not actually be optional because it's too hot, or because of floods, or because we can't rely on where the water's falling, so we can't cool the infrastructure down? And so when I listen to the tech bro future sort of plans, I'm like, well, so if you say Praxis is going to be built in Greenland, and they're going to move all of their people, and then AMOC collapses, then it's going to be so cold it will be practically unsurvivable, right? Is that where you want to go? I don't even feel like they're having these conversations, because the tropics are supposed to go blazingly hot when the AMOC collapses, but which one's going to go first? What's going to happen first? And that's where people are trying to track what's next, what's going to happen, sea level rise, all that sort of stuff. The reality is we can be looking at all these consequences, but we're not doing anything to stop the consequences in the first place.
Yeah.
We're just not doing. And people go, oh, but yeah, I get these videos all the time. Oh, look at this, it's sustainable plastic. Look at this, it's someone doing something out of coconuts. People are constantly sending me these small videos, right? I'm like, that's not what we've got to stop here. Like we've got to completely revolutionize everything. And my hope about this time is that we might be able to do it, because Trump's upending the world order. And in some ways, he feels like an environmentalist, what he's doing, because it needed to happen.
Well, that's a massive silver lining I didn't expect from this conversation.
Yeah, no, it's kind of interesting. Like if I was going to be an environmental leader that was going to turn everything around, I'd do exactly what he's doing. But obviously, that's not the intention. But maybe that's those three groups behind him. Maybe that's the real intention. Who knows? But yeah.
In the meantime, we just have to moderate everything, right? Like you said, I mean, electricity is still going up, travel is still going up. Yeah, a bit more self-control, a bit more self-constraint and restraint, and yeah.
It was good to have David here. All right, anything you guys want to add? Some final thoughts, because we covered a lot of things today.
Did we answer the big question for the day, whether the US has underestimated China? I don't think we really got into that.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? It's funny. Sometimes we set up a theme and then other things come up. I mean, I totally, absolutely, 100% believe that it has. I pay a lot of attention to Western media, but I also pay a lot of attention to media in other parts of the world. And there's very different stories being told. And then when you speak to people, especially from the Northern Hemisphere or even from Australia and New Zealand, their interpretation of what's going on in the world is very, very different to the reality that we all see living on the ground. The media that's here, because, the media in this part of the world is a completely different beast. It's not out there. The governments they don't boast. They're not arrogant. They don't, I remember launching companies in the US and across Europe in the tech industry. They didn't even have a product, but you wouldn't believe that was the case because of the way they were talking. That's not the way this part of the world works, right? They just get on with things. They build things. They release things. They don't even have an announcement half the time. I mean, DeepSeek was a surprise, the way it sort of burst out into the media. And I don't even know if the government was aware of it, because it was a private commercial thing that was created, right? I mean, you know more about it, Joe. So yeah, this is a really interesting area, but you've got to read between the lines in the media. The government's always got its message in the media that it wants you to know, and that's part of the beauty of this region, but it's not understood. And the Western media just doesn't get this region, doesn't get it.
Yeah.
I'm going to say something rather sensational. I would say that to your point, sorry, Philip, if I cut you off. Andrea, to your point about how we do things here in this region, I think the character of the Asian people, right, especially I would say the character of a Chinese person, is I think at the moment way more solid compared to the character. And I know this is a big statement to make. When I say character, I don't mean quality of thinking, right? I mean, you'll be thinking, Cohen, what character, when you hear all these Chinese tourists talking very loudly? That's a different story altogether. Their sense of class hasn't quite caught up with their wealth. But in terms of the character, like you said, right, during COVID, you just get on with things, you just get on with life. The character that you have, right, is I think in China we often misunderstand the character, the moral character of a Chinese person. And I think the way we do things, the way we treat people with respect, the way we save face for people, the way we communicate with emotional intelligence. I personally have benefited so much from my trips to China, my work in China, working with Chinese participants, working with Chinese clients. I would say that the character of China is being misunderstood and also being underestimated by the Americans. And I would say that the Americans have great character, but they need to get back to doing what they do best in the past.
Yeah, nice one.
Yeah, I was just say, I mean, China is still in that survival mode, right? I mean, they've still got a lot of people to bring up, up sort of the wealth curve, and that mindset is incredible, right? I mean, you think about how the U.S. tried to cut off, access to chips or whatever, and what do? They go and create their own stuff, and that's just the mindset, right? And so, are we underestimating that, or is the American underestimating that sort of mindset? I say, yeah, definitely, but we shouldn't forget that it's going to hurt China as well, and it's going to hurt the U.S., and everybody's going to get hurt, and hopefully it's not going to keep on going and trying to go tit for tat all the way through it. So yeah, I think we're underestimating them, but at the same time, let's not forget that they're going to hurt as well. And in America, it's going to hurt. Everybody's going to hurt.
Yeah,
actually.
yeah, exactly. I think the colonial aspect of this is one that we should really be honest about. The white man supremacy sort of mindset, which is very prevalent in the Trump administration and the people around him. That just that at the center of it, I think it's a big part of the story too. Joe?
Well, I was always thinking about this as like, the gorilla in any room is, always going to be prominent, right? And they have the power, right? Until the dinosaur comes along and rips its head off, right? So it's always about context. So you have everything we look at from a human perspective is always on status. It's always about this versus that, smaller, bigger. We compare. That's the way we look at things, right? So when you can lock out everybody, you can make yourself look good, feel good, right? So I mean, I think if you use some family dynamics, right? The idea of the family. This is my home, my roof, my rules, that sort of thing. And the patriarch or matriarch in those kind of situations can feel really powerful. They have everything going for them, right? And then you hear about your neighbor who's got the better house, the daughter has got the better job, the son has got the this and that, and then you go like, oh, my life is shit, right? So it's being cool about that and understanding that, right? I think the thing that we need to do to make the world a better place is to be cool with our own currency, right? Because we're always looking for currency. And I mean, Bhutan is an idea. It's not successful in all aspects of it, but the currency became different, and you could measure your success a different way. And if we can figure out how to do that, then we can start to become our own versions of success. So, I've been thinking about Singapore in relation to the rest of the world, right? So Singapore, I mean, I used to have arguments with Americans who would quickly go to things like, well, chewing gum is banned, you can't speak your mind, blah, blah, blah. And I go like, how do you like them apples right now? Right. I mean, it's kind of happened to you as well, just a different flavor of it. Right. And things are going to be okay. I think if you're in an environment where things work, you don't matter. It doesn't matter so much. Right. I mean, if you're in a really good job and your medical and your dental bills are being paid for and taken care of and all that, you're gonna take some crap from your boss because this is what the whole thing's about, right? But if things aren't going well for you, then those things aren't good enough to compensate for it as well. So that's always going to be the balance. So America's just got one of those things. They have a problem. A problem, not maybe I'll say maybe putting it self-esteem or whatever it is, but something's happening in America. They're unhappy with themselves, and someone's come along and say, well, what's wrong with you? It's all those people over there, and people have bought it.
Yeah. Othering drives me crazy. All right, the final question: what's keeping you distracted? Joe, do you want to go first so they've got an idea of what we do?
Sure. Okay. Well, I have been doing way too much TV watching for someone who's doing the kind of work I do. So what I do is I have trading going on, I have production going on, I have editing going on, and I'll watch some TV at the same time. ADHD, this is how it works. I am watching Matlock, not the old one from the 80s, but the new one from 2024. And it's quite a nice show. I kind of enjoy it.
God, I feel so sorry for your family. I can't even imagine what it's like being around you when you're doing that. All right, Cohen, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm actually rebranding my business around the brand of wholehearted leadership and wholehearted influence. And I think this idea of wholeheartedness is being so tested by what I'm seeing in the world today. But I think it has also given me a stronger impetus really to get this work out and to inspire more people around how we can be the kind of leaders that galvanizes, that bring people together, that that raises everybody instead of othering other people, instead of labeling, instead of like blaming and finger pointing. Yeah. Interestingly enough, I'm going to the US this coming Sunday. Wish me luck. next Sunday, in fact. Wish me luck. My wife is going there for the Berkshire Hathaway conference, the
Yes.
AGM.
Yeah.
So I'm going along and tagging along, and after that we're doing an Alaskan cruise. Probably going to be the last time I'm going to be back in the US for a few years, I would say. So I'm intending to enjoy the fullest of it.
Yeah, nice. All right, Philip.
Not a lot. I mean, I trying to spend more time with my kids and trying to figure out how to help them with their studies. And
How old are they now?
They're 15 and 13. So my son is in secondary 3, and it is tough. I've looked at some of his stuff, and I'm trying to figure out how to help him out. So I'm gonna have to get less distracted about other things and try to figure out how to help him.
Yeah, I've spent the last few weeks helping my son who's in year 11. He's just started his year 11 exams. So yeah, and expectations have been put on his shoulders, so he better meet them because he didn't have the best start, let's just say. But anyway, he's doing well. He's working hard, so I'm impressed. But I'm not a tiger mum by any stretch of the imagination. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm not either, but the standard of education here is extremely high.
Yeah, local school?
Yeah, the local schools, yeah.
Yeah, right. So yeah, neither of my boys would have survived. Not in that. Yeah, no. So for me, I've gone backwards, and I'm watching Ted Lasso again because the news has been so nasty. I need to watch something that makes me smile. So if you want to. If you're feeling like you just can't deal with it, I actually think the best place, like Cohen, you were just saying, if you can sit in your heart at this time, with love, with like real love for the world and everything, and belief in the future, and be part of your community and drive positive change around you and all that sort of stuff. It's a much better place to be. But watching Ted Lasso helps remind me to do that no matter what, because it doesn't mean, if you remember the show, it doesn't mean it's not hard or complicated or sad, but it's about a way of existing in the world. So that's why I'm doing that. But anyway, Philip, Cohen, thank you. That was great. Great conversation. Lots of different topics. What do you reckon, Joe?
I really like the arc of the show today. We went through all the deep, heavy stuff, and the last thing we talked about was watching Ted Lasso because it makes us smile.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Smile. All right, thanks so much.
All right, have a great trip, Colin.
Yeah, do.
Thank you, and thanks all the audience for listening, tuning in.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Good point. Rayson, Chu, David Coe, and we had Sammy. Sunny. Sunny. Yeah, Sunny. Fantastic comments there. Jim Jones popped in, and Ram Prasad. So thank you to everyone who joined us. We really do appreciate it, and left comments. And have a great Easter weekend. All right. See you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.